Bodies is over, but we are just getting started here on post-show recaps. That's right, it's full spoiler recaps. We're binging a new season of a show every week and chatting about it in full spoilery detail in just one podcast. I'm Jess Sterling. Today we are discussing the Netflix miniseries Bodies, and of course, I am joined here by my time-traveling co-host Grace Leeder. Grace, which timeline are you from?
Oh, well, I think this one. But I was going to ask you, Jess, you know what, Jess? No, you are loved.
Oh no!
I
Oh
know.
no, you're in the culty timeline.
Well,
So
mhm.
yeah, we're talking Bodies, 8 episodes on Netflix, about an hour a piece. If you have not watched the show yet and you're thinking about it, maybe we could talk a little bit about what the show is about if it's something that people are interested in. Because
Yeah,
Grace, I gotta
true.
say, I think this is probably the most complicated show we've watched of all of them that we've watched so far on this
Mhm.
podcast. But I also think it's probably the best one we've watched on this podcast so far.
Yeah, you had said this, and I purposely didn't respond to you in my message because I wanted to save it for a discussion on the podcast. Which
Yeah.
is, I think that I am torn whether this is better than The Fall of the House of Usher. I think that,
Mhm.
but that's like not your total jam. Like horror is not
Yeah,
totally your
horror's not
thing. So
usually my thing. I think that this is more of a sci-fi mystery type of show, which sci-fi is iffy for me sometimes, depending on how complicated it can get.
yeah, I mean, you're
This
no
one
Dr. Amanda. You'll go to space, but
I will go to
it's yeah.
space.
Mhm.
But I do think like if I can give a spoiler free type of recommendation here, in my opinion, if you like the show Dark, if you
Yeah.
listened to Grace Ariel Philly discuss Dark, this is a show for you. I think this really fits well into like you like Dark, you like Bodies. One word, Netflix
Yeah.
shows with
Mhm.
time travel and sci-fi. There you go.
Yeah, this is a bit I've seen this a lot, like, in Reddit posts and people chatting about bodies. They're like, "Oh, it's like Dark," and I do agree. I think that Dark, if you've never watched Dark, go watch it because it's maybe my favorite scripted TV show of all time. But I think this is, yeah, right in line with what Dark was trying to do, with maybe a little bit less, well, let's say less character stuff, but no,
Well,
it's
it's only one
yeah,
season too, so it's hard
true.
to compare to Dark when they had 3 seasons of character development, right? Like which we'll get into when we talk spoilers. But of course, if you have not yet subscribed, please do postrecaps.com/full spoiler recaps. We appreciate a 5-star review. It helps more people find the podcast.
Yeah.
Beyond that, if you want to see what else we're covering here on Post Show Recaps, let me just say it's a lot. Go to postshowrecaps.com/subscribe and you could see every show that we are covering here. And of course, if you have not yet watched Bodies, you could do so on Netflix. That's where we watched it. I binged this quite quickly. This is something I know, Grace, we're going to get into as well, probably towards the end of the podcast of like, is it bingeable, right? Like, is this a bingeable show? Should it have been dropped all at
Mhm.
once versus in a slow amount of time? Think I watched this over a 4-day period is about what I ended up consuming it in.
Yeah, I think I did mine in 3 days.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
it's a lot. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, overall I enjoyed it, and I think we should give everyone the quick plot recap, which Grace, you write these for this podcast, and I'm very curious
Yes.
to hear yours on this because there's so much happening in the show.
Yeah, I thought the Continental was tricky, especially sometimes I'm like cramming to watch these before the podcast. Just
Yeah,
a spoiler alert, I'm heading away on travel, so we're like recording this like super ahead of time. It also means like we've recorded back to back. We've binged a lot of TV in the last few
I
days.
have been
Yes.
so
Yeah.
much I mean, we've
Yeah.
recorded 2 full spoiler recaps podcasts inside of like 4 days,
Yeah.
and I think my
Yeah.
brain might burst from just all of the television I've crammed into it.
I've also been doing the Fall of Rome, so like
What's wrong with you? Are you okay? I think we
I'm
need to do
fine.
just like a real life
Hey,
check-in. Are you all right?
it's funny. I'm going on a work trip, but it's actually like a podcasting vacation. So I think I'm okay. I will barely be able to watch TV over the course of the next week. You might need to check in with me after that.
Yeah.
Maybe. All right, let me do my best to summarize Bodies. And basically what I've done here is I'm going to set up basically what they set up at the beginning, and then I'm going to kind
Mhm.
of like jump to the end because I feel like the middle episodes, they're very good, but I do feel like there's a lot of like unraveling the mystery that will make more sense in the context of like the end. So
Yes.
basically, the tagline of the show: 4 bodies, 4 timelines, 1 mystery. In 2023, Shahara Hassan discovers a naked man with a marking on his wrist and a bullet hole in his eye. Iris Maplewood, Charles Whiteman, and Alfred Hillinghead all discover the same man in 2053, 1941, and 1890, respectively. All four try to uncover the mystery at play. And basically, we learn that Elias Mannix, a young boy in 2023, sets off a nuclear explosion in London. And by 2053, he is a high ranking police detective who uses the secrets of time travel to ultimately go back to 1890, where he assumes the identity of Julian Walker. There, he lives out his life until 1941, putting things in place to make sure the future goes according to plan, and also sets up a little bit of a cult known as Kyle, aka Know You Are Loved.
I'm sorry, known as Kyle. I just
That's
never really thought about the fact that it's a human person's name.
yes,
Like, my
yes,
cult is named Kyle. Welcome.
Kyle. Hey, little Kyle. Hey, you're my little cult. Yeah. Um, Gabriel Defoe tries to follow Elias through. He's basically the one who's like figured out that time travel is possible, but ends up being shot by Iris as he goes through, and he gets stuck in several different times, aka he is the Naked Man. In 2053, Iris and Shahara work to make sure Julian has regrets about his future choices and puts together a plan in action to prevent the apocalypse or the explosion in London and all the other bad things that come along with Elias Mannix's decision to go back in time. Maplewood joins Hassan and Defoe's plan to stop Mannix. In the past, Maplewood travels back in time, but loses her ability to walk, which she had had in 2053. There's ability to like replace her spine, basically. But it doesn't work in 1890. She's arrested and placed in a jail cell alongside Hillinghead, who confessed to Defoe's murder. Hillinghead is about to be killed by Julian Harker, but Maplewood shares information about the future with Hillinghead, including Harker/Mannix's identity and plans. Hillinghead tells Mannix about the information he's received, causing doubt in Mannix's mind. Mannix still has Hillinghead killed, but returns home and confesses the truth to Polly, who resents him for her father's death. Polly being Hillinghead's daughter, who Mannix marries. They do marry, they have a child, but Polly is not devoted to Mannix in the way that she once was. Mannix secretly alters his own recorded messages that he left behind and makes amends and asks Whiteman to deliver it to Hassan in 2023, leading to a chain of events ending in his death. In 2053, Defoe and Hassan discover Maplewood's name alongside Hillinghead's on a brick wall, proving that she traveled back in time, and Whiteman's name as a clue for Hassan. Hassan travels to 2023, the day of the bombing, to retrieve an important record hidden at the police hangout bar. She finds Mannix's record, which advises young Elias not to proceed with his plan to blow up London. Hassan contacts Hassan in 2023, plays the recording for Elias, and convinces him to abandon the bomb. Elias sacrifices himself to prevent the destruction Mannix set in motion, and he disappears, fulfilling his fate. And that's basically what happens on Bodies.
It's a lot,
With like a lot
right?
that's missing. Like
No,
we don't
yeah,
get into that.
there's so much happening. Like,
Yeah.
there's a lot of like this person is less so than in Dark, which again I'm not going to spoil Dark, but it's really
Yeah.
really do feel like kind of cousins in a way.
Yeah. It's his
Where
British
they're
cousin. It's the British and
it's the
German
British
shows.
cousin to German Dark, yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
But yeah, it gets very complicated when we have the different timelines, and then you do see a few characters that appear in a few different of these timelines. But I guess the biggest shock for me, Grace, in this
Mhm.
show was, I think in time travel shows, it's either whatever happened kind of
Yes.
mentality of you cannot change anything,
Yes.
and then this show steers away from that, in that you can make changes. And obviously we see that happen with Elias, right? Like he ends up disappearing as a result of the changes that all of these other characters made. But what
Mhm.
I found most interesting is I love the differences in the time, right? I think that they
Same.
have these separate time periods that do feel so starkly different, which is why I think it works so well for me to have such drastic differences, right? We're not talking 1970, 1980, 1990. You know what I mean? Like we're talking like
Mhm.
huge, huge differences in
Yeah.
time.
1890, 1941, 2023, 2053. Yeah,
Yeah.
is what we're
So,
dealing with.
I mean, huge swaths of time. And they're all kind of, I think I was pretty much immediately hooked by like, okay, how is this body in four different times? Like, and
Yeah.
where is the bullet? Right? Like, what happened? Um, I don't know. I found it really fascinating. And I think it does take effort to watch the show, right? Like it
Yeah, it's
is,
not a second screener.
you have to be watching at all times, especially because if you're a dumb American like me, usually shows with accents also tend to trip
Mm,
me up. I usually
mm.
watch with subtitles, because like closed captioning, because I miss words. I miss things when
Can I
there's
tell
like,
you the best example of this? This would become really big in I can't remember the show, but it's Rob Stark was in it. It's also I think a BBC show that ended up on Netflix. But the biggest one is they often say they're saying trying to say ma'am, like hello ma'am, but
mhm.
it always sounds like mum. And so there's
They're just,
constantly in these
you
shows,
think they're
and
calling people their mom everywhere
yes.
they go?
And in that show, that's a show where, spoiler alert, like he kind of ends up having like a love affair with the woman he's like being a bodyguard for. So he
Oh
keeps
no,
being
and
like,
he's
he's
calling
like,
her
oh,
mom.
hello, hello, mom. And then it's like he's like, yeah, and then and he constantly calls her mom.
Yeah.
That happened in the show too. There's a bunch of people who say mom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I do think, okay, because this is only 8 episodes, right? And it's an hour and a piece. And I think that something I appreciated that this show does that not every time travel show or every show with even multiple times we're visiting, not every show does this. I love that they had like that analog clock that always had the year like flipping, right? To tell you what year you were going to be in next. And
They have
along,
two mechanics. And Dark does this too. Dark has like there's often like a ticking clock or like like
yes.
zoom in and zoom out, and then we're like supposed to be in a different time period. There's basically two mechanics that the show uses to tell us we're in a different time period, which is the flipping like clock. It's not like an
It's
analog
a
clock.
year.
It's
It's
like yeah, it's like almost like
the
a
ones with the little
Rolodex kind
flappy
of.
things
Yeah,
that
yeah.
go, yeah.
Yeah. Or they'll put everybody together on the screen in separate boxes and then like move in and then like so like one box it'll like get smushed, another one will come in. This is such an elegant way to talk about like graphic effects on the screen. And then like another one will come in and then like the first one will get like moved off and we're like now we're in the other time period. There's a couple
Yeah.
of ways that they pretty smartly help you keep track of like
And
when
I
we are. Yeah.
And there are also audio cues too. I think like the sirens, there are a lot of like
Right.
siren noises that tend to be triggering a time shift. But speaking to your point about the different kind of panels that we get, like there's a lot of
Yeah,
times where
panels.
we'll get they call
Yeah.
them investigators, I think, in the UK versus us, like, police people, policemen, whatever, police officers.
Mhm.
But they, like, when they show these panels, I feel like it's also just kind of a nod because this is based off of a graphic novel, like a
Yes,
comic.
true.
And so you have those like kind of panels as well. Um, so I really liked that because again, I get very disoriented in shows with multiple time periods and timelines. And I found it really helpful to be like, oh, by the way, FYI, this is the year we're in. Especially because, yes, they start off in those years that you mentioned, but sometimes we are, oh, here's a year later or 2 years later. We're still within that general timeline. But I guess the biggest question for me, Grace, because I can't, I said it 10 times, I can't help but compare it to Dark. How do you feel about the character depth we get? Because we only have 8 episodes, an hour apiece with these characters. And we have a lot of characters in the show. I mean, a lot of people we're trying to service, I would say, through only 8 hours of showtime.
Yeah, I actually think it's pretty it's really well done. I do think that the immediate hook of we basically meet three different people who are going to find this naked dead body in their time period is so compelling as the start to a sci-fi show. It's so good. And but on top of that, I do feel like, science fiction is the metaphor that what is the metaphor that this director or writer is going to be using to tell a story about people. And I do think that this show does that really effectively. I think that when you start, you have Shahara, who I think unfortunately, just because she's like in our time period, I feel like kind of the least intrigued by to a degree, but she's a
Mm,
very important part. And I think she's a really tremendous actor. And by the end of it, I really do enjoy her storyline, which is she's basically, she's dealing in modern times, which feels like frantic. She says at the very end of the show, as like we're in an alternate history where the bomb hasn't blown up. She's like, I just feel like this, like the world is about to explode. Right. But then we have, basically next we go to Carl Whiteman, who is a Jewish man living in Britain in 1941. And I do think this is compelling in terms of the idea that, uh, you know, it's not like just because Germany was the one literally committing genocide against Jewish people doesn't mean that the treatment of Jewish people in Britain
right.
was great. There was still a lot of anti-Semitism, and so his place in this world, his name is Carl Whiteman, but he has actually changed his name from Carl Weissman. He like has like anglicized his name to sort of avoid anti-Semitism. And then also like then he also though is the one who's like secretly, you know, part of this organization that he's trying to like he's kind of
Yeah.
been wrapped up in himself in, and
But he
he's the
says himself later, right? It's because of gambling debts or something, like, that's
right,
the reason he's doing it, and
right,
I have to be honest, like, at first, I found Detective Whiteman to be, like, one of my least favorites until Esther comes into the picture,
yeah,
and
yeah,
as soon as the little girl Esther comes in and
yeah,
she sasses him, and I was like, "Yes, girl, give it to him,
hmm,
show him who's boss," and he takes her in, and he can't kill her, right? Like, he's been instructed to
yeah,
kill her, he can't do it, and so he takes her in, and then they're going to use the like the what is it, the bomb scares or whatever it is as like an excuse to kind of get away and hide,
right, right,
and he leaves her with this older woman thinking that he's going to go investigate someone else who's been following them. It turns out no, the older woman is Polly, who is Hillinghead's daughter, and we'll get into all of that later. But Esther's death was one of the biggest, like, impactful moments for me. I
hmm,
was devastated. I don't know why. I don't know what it was about Esther. I think it was like her snark and sass that just made me so happy, and I
yeah,
wanted her to escape. And so seeing his reaction to Esther's death really endeared me to him as a character more
yeah.
than pretty much anything else he did.
Well, he was told to kill her, and then you think that he does, and then he hasn't. He's trying to protect her, right? And so, yeah, and she's just like
Mhm.
the scene where he comes home and she's like dancing with the windows open. He's like,
So
no,
cute.
no, no, no. Yeah. So their relationship is pretty cute. And then also you have Hillinghead, who is a gay man in 1890, but has lived his life as a straight man and has a wife and a daughter, and gets caught up in with this man named Henry Ash, who's a photographer and journalist who then they end up having a bit of romantic thing going on. So I thought that the way that were telling the story over the course of 4 different times. So then there's also Iris Maplewood in the modern time, and her storyline with her and her brother not wanting to get the spine, technology that she
It
got. Like,
seems yeah, it seems like, and this is where I guess I got a little tripped up, and maybe more time with the characters or more time to build the world, I guess, would have been helpful. It seems like both Iris and her brother were born with like a genetic condition. That means
right.
that their spines don't work as intended, right? They end up being in a wheelchair.
Hmm.
And the way for her to get this, like, I think they called it like a spino or something, like it had
Yeah.
an acronym associated with it. The way she could get this like spine attachment that allows her to walk is by joining Kyle, Know You Are Loved.
Right.
And because of that, it seems like she is like a police officer of sorts in this regime that feels culty, right? It feels like everything is better now. We will
Hmm.
help you. We need
Hmm.
order. And so
Hmm.
she has joined that in order to be able to get this spine implant thing. And I really loved the conversation that we have. It might be in the final episode or the episode before, maybe it might be the penultimate, between Hillinghead and Iris when they're in
Hmm.
the jail cells. And
Hmm.
he asks, "Why did you join the police?" And she says, "To belong." "Why did you join the police?" And he says, "To hide." And
Yeah.
I thought that was absolutely fascinating. Like, the
Hmm.
fact that the 4 characters we are following are members of law enforcement of varying degrees, like, throughout history, is fascinating. And the reason that she did it, right? Like, we get the idea, what we get based on the conversation she has with her brother is that she did this. The only reason she ever did it was to get the spine thing so that she could walk. And he was not willing to do it. He wasn't willing to basically like join the man, if you will, in order to
Hmm.
do that. But I guess
Hmm.
where I got confused is like, what exactly is Kyle? You know what I mean? Like, what exactly did they do post 2023, post the bombing and all of that, that like changed everything so drastically? I got a little lost in the 2053 storyline at times because I didn't quite understand what Kyle was in that timeline.
Well, I think basically Kyle is the preservation of events to make sure that the preservation of events can happen,
Right,
right?
but
So
what are
it's
they to the like front facing? Like, what are they to society? What do they mean to society?
well, they're definitely. I mean, the idea of like know you are loved in it itself, I do feel like that's like can be a pretty like that's a powerful message. Like I don't really know, but like if I'm to like make the leap in logic here, there is like a lot of fascist propaganda does like come in the form of like, let me help you. It like revolves around you have to find a group to like,
Yeah.
be the ones who are trying to take it away from you and don't deserve it, right? But that is so much of like when you look at the history, like you look at like Donald Trump and the United States, it's like, immigrants and LGBT people, all these people are trying to like take away your American freedom, right? And so like, I'm here for you. Like, no, basically, like, make America great again is like, no, you are loved,
Ugh,
no,
yeah.
I mean,
No, I
this
know.
is
I
this,
just can't help it. I hear it, and it's just a,
yeah,
it's a
this is the
reflex.
fascist playbook of like, you have to like, this is
Yeah.
populism, right? Of like, let me tell you that like you deserve all of these things, and then who are we going to take it from to like, amass? So no, you are loved. I feel like it's like kind of like the nicest, cleanest version of like of that playbook. I feel like to basically just make
Yeah.
sure that like all of these things happen so that one man, Elias Mannix, can go back in time to become Julian Harker, right?
Yeah, and this is where it gets very interesting, right? Because we find out that Mannix is Iris's boss in a
Yes.
way, and
Yes.
so she is supporting
Did you
him.
catch this when you're watching? Like, were you like when Hillinghead and Ash go to see Julian Harker? Were you able to connect that that's the same actor who's playing
It took me a
the
minute.
guy on the wall? Yeah,
Yeah,
I know like it's Stephen Graham, who's a really great actor. He's been in
yeah.
like Peaky Blinders. I think he's in the Pirates of the Caribbean, at least one of the movies. Like he's pretty good. I almost feel like I don't know. I like it doesn't really matter ultimately because we're like 8 episodes in, but I just wonder like could they have done more to like sort of I don't know. I guess I'm like debating this. Is it perfect the way it is in terms of like, yeah, it's like if you're just watching, it's clearly the same dude. Or do I want it to be more? Is there a way, there's like I can't remember what I watched or something, but there's like a storyline. Oh, it's one of the time travel movies we watch on Dark, where like a character's like face literally gets burned and then they like reconstruct it with like future technology in a way that like then they can have
Interesting.
like two different actors play the same person. I don't know if I like want that, but I just thought for me, it was very obvious that it was the same person. So I don't know if like that was the intended effect to be like, well, you're watching, so like kudos to you. You get in on the thing, which is not
Yeah.
like the biggest reveal of the show, right? Like,
No, I kind of like a little bit more of a like blam, like we gotcha.
yeah,
I guess I like a little bit of like the dramatics of it all, the spark and fizzle of it all. But yeah, I mean, this is where I got a little bit tripped up at times. Was I think Elias was a lot of the show relies on Elias working as a character and understanding his motives behind everything, right? Like I guess generally speaking, what ends up happening is we meet like teenager Elias, who was in foster care, right? He had a foster family who are part of Kyle because
yeah,
he created Kyle in the future, and they're
yeah,
the ones who know what his future is. They know what he's supposed to do.
yeah,
And the reason that his father doesn't have any contact with him is because he knows that he has to be hardened. He has to have like a very brutal upbringing to
yeah,
get to the place in time where his brain will want to destroy London with a bomb, right? Like that is the entire purpose of the thing. And it's very trippy. It's very like I almost had to do a family tree at one point because I got a little bit confused because we have characters who change their names to remain in secret, right? Like I'm looking at Barber, who is
mm-hmm.
Shahara's boss, but he is also secretly Elias's father. So
Yep,
that was like a very big reveal. And then, of course, we have the two Pollys. We have child Polly, Hillinghead's daughter, and
yep,
then adult Polly later, who ends up killing Esther. So
mm-hmm.
again, all of those worked very, very well for me. I got a little tripped up when at the very end, I am used to, I don't know, Grace, you could tell me, I feel like you probably watch a little bit more time travel stuff than I have. I feel like most of the time, it really is the whatever happened, happened. You can't make changes. This show was very different. And I guess that tripped me up a lot because they were able to go back and change things, which meant that Elias just didn't end up existing because he couldn't have gone back in time to have sex with Polly, who then has kids, and then her kids have kids, and then Elias. Boom.
Yeah. I think though that most shows that try to do whatever happened get stuck in the idea that the ending will feel unsatisfactory.
Yeah.
And so actually a lot of what happens time travel sometimes actually does end up like figuring out a way to make it all change. So I don't want to like I'm trying to think of an example that doesn't feel spoilery,
Spoil
but
it's all gonna yeah, it's all gonna feel
I mean,
spoiler.
probably the most famous time travel movie of all time is a you can change the past movie, which is Back to the Future, which the
Right.
whole idea there is that like as he's going back in time, he is messing with the future. And it's like the more that he
Right.
involves himself in that thing, literally for him, it's like his own existence will not happen. So it's like the
Mhm.
same, but different. But that is you can change history, and he has to like then figure out how to like recorrect it and make a new history that includes himself. I know it's very like complicated, but um I do feel like most time travel movies I do prefer whatever happens, but I do find that the shows get stuck in this how do you then end that thing, because I do feel like one of the things that gets tricky about a time travel show is with whatever happens is like, yeah, we're complete. There's a scene where Defoe is with Iris and he's like, they're having wine, right? And she's like, I can do whatever I want. And he's like, no, like, here's why every decision you've ever made, like, here's why you drinking this wine is like actually the byproduct of like so many other things. Like it's your taste buds,
Mhm.
which are from your DNA and like, whatever. And so he's like, and so I think that's the biggest problem is that, and I think Dark is a show that does this extremely well, but even at the end has to kind of like blow it up. But they do a really good job of being like, there's a saying in that show which is you can't will what you want. I'm gonna mess it up, and I've rewatched that show many times, but the idea is like every character choice, like when people are like, why don't they do the opposite thing, it's because like, well, it's like their like innermost desire to like do the thing that they do, which is why they do that thing, which I guess is the same thing that like
Well,
Defoe is
that's
kind of
similar to
saying.
what Defoe says, right? I loved. I think some of the best moments of the show for me is when we get these like very deep conversations between two characters. One of which is Gabriel Defoe and
Iris
Iris. Yeah,
Maplewood, yeah.
where they're in her apartment and they're sitting down. Like, she's had a couple glasses of wine, right? He's manipulating her. This is, we find out later, an entire ruse, basically, but they do have this deep conversation where they talk about why they do what they do, and he insinuates that no, everything is predetermined, like free will
Hmm.
doesn't exist. And
Hmm.
she hates that notion. She's like, as most people probably would, because it means you have no agency in your entire life, and it's kind of a very nihilistic way to view the world of what's even the point, I guess. But I really loved the conversation they had, and I felt like the show, I don't know. I liked this conversation because it implied a closeness between those two characters that does matter later on when she regrets shooting him, right? Like, she's the one who ends up shooting him, and he's the
Hmm.
body that's in all these timelines, and she goes back wanting to save him as a result. And I don't know, I just thought it was really interesting that even though they're on the opposite sides of things and that she's involved in Kyle and he is obviously a direct opposition to them,
Hmm.
that him and Hassan were like, oh, but we could use her. We should bring her in. We should tell her the truth. When she knows the
Hmm.
truth, she'll be on board. I thought it was really fascinating. I almost wish, though, I felt like the character of Iris specifically for me, especially when we're in 2053, which is one of the more fascinating timelines because it's the only one for us that hasn't yet come to pass, right?
Hmm.
Every all those other years we've either lived or have history to look at in those years, but 2053 is a complete new one. We see like automated technology, we see, a lot of advanced things, and I almost felt like the character of Iris was a little underdeveloped in that I wish I knew a little bit more of her motivation, of exactly how she feels about where she's working, knowing what seems to be like a difficult upbringing and how different her perspective is than her brother's. I almost wish we had a little bit more character development because I thought the actor was absolutely fabulous.
Hmm.
Shira Haas, she was incredible. I thought, like, her face acting, right? Like, I just thought she was so good that I almost wish they gave her a little bit more, which is, I'm being very greedy. It's 8 hours of television. I'm like, give me more of her. But I really felt like she could have used a little bit more depth so I understood her motivations a little bit more.
I actually, love her storyline. I think there's like a lot of like, I feel like to me it's like almost like I think it's a little underappreciated, the story of really the spinal thing. And just because I think that for me as somebody who lives with like two chronic conditions, I do think that that's a really powerful story. This idea that she basically, that and the idea of like, sometimes we think of like, yeah, the futuristic world, and the idea that, yeah, you do have to like, give up something to, it's not money. It's like she has to like become part of the police force to be able to get this like spine thing that her brother is not willing to get. I just thought this like extremely powerful, the way that we're sort of like, I don't know, this idea too that like, um I don't know, I did really I like that stuff a lot, in the way that then she's sort of stuck and feels compelled, despite it being something that like should just be given to people, right? Should just be like,
Oh, it
anybody who
should be
needs
a
it should
given.
get it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, but yet, because it's not the way in which like she can feel compelled by the inner workings of this thing to like, yeah, be influenced by Elias Mannix to do basically like partially his bidding, and then ultimately like rejecting that notion. And I thought it was like, pretty clear, the idea like she's like determined to go back in time, and then it's like, oh yeah, she got this thing that like, it, yeah, of course it's not going to work in 1890. I thought that was like, in terms of like ways in which the longer the show goes, the way that they can develop twists, because there's so like, and it, I talked about this a lot with Dark too, of I really gave that show credit for holding back on pieces of information that like
Yeah.
would be so, juicy to reveal, like, as soon as you can do it. But that is a tough balance for a show to, I think, to find, of like how much in a mystery type show. Like I was feeling going into episode 7, like, well, we kind of know everything. And then it was like, I don't think I had known that like Polly was married to Mannix. Did we know this before? I was like,
No, we didn't
we get
know
the
until
reveal
the
that like
yeah.
the guy's like, "Oh, hello, mother," and it was like, okay, that's it, But like, yeah, and then it's like this whole episode that's basically about like Mannix going back in time and then like seducing Polly, right? Like luring Polly
Well,
in,
that's
this
the
young
other
girl, like,
question
yeah.
I have that we're talking now that we're talking about this is, was Elias truly in love with Polly, or was it all about, cuz I mean, listen, at times it felt like he did really have feelings for her, right? Like it did seem like it really hurt him to have to tell her the truth about certain things. But it also felt like, well, he's doing this because he knows he did it, right? Like that he knows.
It only hurt him once he knows that somebody else. Once Hillinghead knows, now people know. Like I think until the point that he didn't think he needed to have regret for doing it, he doesn't have regret for doing it. And now it's like, oh yeah, now I kind of like do have to face up to this. And it's obviously like not the plan that he had intended. He would tell her after the baby. It's super cynical to like, once he had the baby, to then like be like, okay, Polly, now I can let you in with all my cult friends. Like
Yeah.
he's, I think like, I love coming of age films, and this ultimately ends up being like a choice that a young teen ends up having to make, right? This choice at the end for Elias not to detonate the bomb, right? Is this like the inner turmoil he's facing, and there's a whole dilemma here about like whether or not it's worth it to like cause this much hurt for the world or not, and and why he should do that. I don't know. I found that really compelling. I think that like once he's done, like once Elias is Julian Harker, I think he's like incredibly evil man. He gets like the fact that like I actually did. There's a documentary that is eerily similar to when he's like talking with
His
his
fake mother.
mom, his fake
Yeah.
mom, and the scene where even the end of that scene is like he's like, I think we're gonna have to like advocate to get a new dog. Like
Yeah,
he's
that
pretty
was
evil.
messed up. I mean, listen,
Yeah,
leave it to dogs. I'm just saying.
yeah,
Okay, as someone who has a dog and
yeah.
who is, I love dogs. If there's a zombie apocalypse, if there's ever someone impersonating someone else, like the trick is to always have a dog, because dogs know. They always know if someone's a zombie. They always know if
Mhm.
someone is like impersonating someone else. They know. Get a dog.
I like
You
that
know.
this is you've said that in a zombie apocalypse, people are going to be
Yeah.
impersonating someone else. Yeah,
Well, no,
rather than
just
just in any time. Yeah.
at any time, but also especially in a zombie
Okay. All
apocalypse.
right.
It's very important. Get a dog. Um,
Okay.
so a character we haven't talked a ton about that I need to talk about because, in my opinion, probably one of the most tragic characters in this entire miniseries
Yeah.
is Hillinghead.
Yeah.
Kyle Soller plays Alfred Hillinghead. I'm not a Star Wars person. I do know he was in Andor, and I think he was really beloved maybe on that show. I think.
Um, no, I
He
think
played Cyril Karn.
no, I think he's really hated in that
He's
show.
hated, but
I
he was
think.
good. He was good. Is that like? I mean, he acted well. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Not
Yes, I
not
think
like the
I think
character is
people
beloved.
do appreciate Kyle Soller as Cyril Karn, but he
Okay,
was absolutely detestable, I believe, in that show.
that's
I remember
interesting
clearly.
because
Yeah.
anytime Hillinghead was on my screen, I was like, oh my god, poor Hillinghead. He just loves Ash so much and they can't be together. All I
Yeah.
wanted was scenes of him and Henry Ash. I'm so sorry, but
Yeah.
like I I loved them together. I was like, you could
Yeah.
feel that sexual chemistry the whole time. And I
Mhm.
felt so bad for Hillinghead. And he's trying to do the right thing, right? Like he is your typical, he's like your Ned Stark, where like he will do the right thing no
Mm.
matter the cost. He
Mhm.
wants to protect his family. He wants to protect Henry. He ends up like putting himself in jail rather than lying and saying it was Henry to
Mhm.
protect him. I loved him and I felt so bad. I was so happy when they ended up righting the wrongs of the past and he lived and he just makes eyes at Henry as they walk down the street together.
I
I
mean,
was
still
like,
a tough life,
oh, of course.
for
I mean, he's a closeted gay man in what,
1890. Yeah.
1890? Like, yeah, dude, that guy's having a rough time of it. And like to his point, again, that's why I really felt like it was so impactful to have that conversation between him and Iris, where he says, I joined the police to belong, or to excuse me, to hide, to look like I belong here, to kind of go under the radar, if you will.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I just fully believed everything he was selling. Anytime he said anything, I was fully bought in. And I don't know if it was just like the sincerity of the actor or what it was. It just like he broke my heart apart. Maybe it was the beard, Grace. You know I'm a
Mhm.
sucker for a good
Mm.
facial hair.
Yeah, yeah, it's very good. It's cute. You know, the thing, probably one of the more tragic things in the whole show is when Elias goes to see Hillinghead and he's like, "Dude, you were just born in the wrong time. Like, you know, if you were from my time, you two could be together. You could hold hands in the street.
Isn't
You
that
could be in love."
brutal?
Yeah, it's very sad.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do think Hillinghead is a good, you know, in terms of he's like sort of the first person to like discover this murder. It comes in like, you know, years later, in terms of like in the storyline we're mostly in, like this is how Shahara finds like figures out that there's like something going on. It's because of like his detective work, right? When it's
Yeah,
in the
he marks
newspaper.
up the wall on that particular lane where the
Yeah.
murder happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's like very important, and it's too because he's like, yeah, he has to be the detective in like the least detective-y, you know, DNA.
But
There's
he's
nothing
also
like,
the one who
yeah,
sees Mannix's reflection in the window and realizes,
yeah.
oh, he has a cane. If he has a cane, he probably has a limp. And because he's holding the cane in this hand, it's probably a limp on the left. And because it was a hexagonal cane, it means he's well off. Like he's a
And
really
he
good
goes to
detective.
the cane maker and gives the Masonic Lodge handshake so that he can like get the information.
Which
Yeah,
can
he's
we
very
the
good.
Masonic Lodge handshake was very funny to me because it was
Uh-huh.
basically just you shake hands and then you take your little pointer finger and you like
Well,
rub the wrist of someone. It's very funny.
Henry Ash, he asks, he's like, tell me the handshake, and he's like, no, I can't tell you. He's like, what, a little tickle? And he's like, I'm not telling you. I was like, oh, you were right though, Henry. It is a little tickle.
It is
It's like a
a
little
little
tickle.
tickle. It is
Yeah.
a little tickle.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really loved his storyline, but it certainly felt of one of the more the tragic, you know. I mean, they all have tragedies, right? Like, I mean, Shahara lost her son. That was brutal, absolutely awful to watch. And I really love Shahara. I thought it was interesting, right? We get like two versions of her played by obviously the same actor, just aged
Mhm.
up. I thought that was really fascinating and kind of watching her become very hardened after her son dies was fascinating. I don't know. I thought they did a really good job with casting, and overall, I was pretty invested in most of these characters by the end of it.
Yeah, I agree, and you know, that on one hand, I don't know if I love the like you can change what happens ending, but at
Yeah.
the same time, it's hard not to like the basically epilogue we get of like Shahara and her son back together. Carl runs into Esther. Alfred and Henry can be together. Like in one way, it's like, oh, okay, that's
It's a happy
sweet.
ending.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can we talk
She'll
very quickly about the ending, which
yeah.
I was a little confused by, which is seemingly Shahara gets into the cab and she makes this as this line about, it feels like the world's gonna explode, which is an allusion to the fact that like a bomb would go off, but it's not going to go off, whatever. But there's still like protests or whatever. And then in the cab, seemingly Iris is her taxi cab driver. For me, I'm very confused by the ending. It seems like, why does Iris time travel back in time? Is there the potential that this is not a limited series, that it gets renewed and like this is something, in the future? It felt much more like a wink of like, wouldn't it be fun if she time traveled and she's her taxi driver? But I was a little confused by it. I didn't love it.
Yeah, it doesn't really make sense. The only thing I guess I am also confused by is, and maybe this is silly of me to get hung up on, but like, okay, so Esther, Iris is from 2053, which is where she gets the spino implant thing where you attach to your spine, you have to charge it like a cell phone. Seemingly it takes like 5 minutes to charge, which, hi, sign me up for that technology.
Yeah, for real. Yeah.
And so when she does originally time travel, she loses that technology when she goes all the way back to 1890. And so then I guess my question is, if she time travels to 2023, how is she driving the car if she doesn't have the spino technology?
Well, you would just, I don't know. There's also apparently "No, You Are Loved" is on a building, on one of the buildings at the end as well. So I don't know. Yeah.
Maybe I'm not smart enough to figure out the ending then.
The showrunner, I think, has said that it's basically like an ellipses in case they want to do more.
But it's a mini series. Okay, this is where I'm
but it
might,
but it might not, but it might not.
But it's a mini series, Grace.
Yeah, but it might not be
mini. Like this is where I get annoyed with shows because it's like if you had just end it and just be.
I would be very open to more of this. I think I would love for them to explore more of this show. So
yeah, if they were gonna make it a finite ending, then just make it don't. What are you doing? I don't know. I just get annoyed.
Well,
just
they don't know. They don't know. They basically said like they didn't know other people would watch this. So if nobody watched it, then like
we watched it. Everyone watch it. Then we'll get more.
There you go. That's why they put in the ellipses, because they thought it would be fun to do. Yeah, to potentially there's more.
No. Should we talk about some superlatives?
Let's do it.
We decided to change best episode to now best scene because most times our favorite episode is probably going to be the finale of most shows.
Unless it's like a bad ending and then we pick something else. But I think more so it's not for me more than the finale. I'm just finding I'm binging the shows, so they blend so much together. I really can't tell you what happened in the show and episode between episode 3 and episode 7. Like I that's not true, but like kind of is true. They all blend together for me too much that I don't think I'll ever be able to accurately be like, this was the best episode of TV.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But your favorite, do you have a favorite scene from
I do.
From the show? What is it?
Okay, I was thinking about this. And Jess, you play video games. You have a Twitch stream where you play video games.
Yeah.
There is there are a handful of video games where the best part of the video game is the like first 2-3 hours of the game. Minecraft, Civilization, Crusader Kings is one for me. Where like the options of what you could be doing are endless, and the best part is like when you're playing Civilization, you're on like this like randomly generated map, and you're like exploring it and seeing what's there, and the options for what this thing could be are endless. And sometimes you have a very enjoyable game, and sometimes it's like, yeah, that was fine, I'm gonna restart, and that wasn't a very good beginning, I'm gonna restart. This is a show that I thought was tremendous, but nothing for me was as fun as the back-to-back scenes of the naked man lying in the street as each detective uncovers. For me, that was such a fun, like, the other thing too is like, it's so good, it's so captivating and interesting, and I can immediately sell people on this show from that. Like, it has an immediate basically elevator pitch of like, 4 different people or 3 different, I guess you have to say 3 because but they say 4 timelines, but you can basically say 3 detectives find a dead body in 3 different timelines. Like 2023, 1941, 1890. That's the show. There's a mystery. It's so good. It's like, that is so good. And the imagery of like the thing on the wrist, the like H like cross symbol, hatch symbol, the one eye being shut out. It's so tremendously good that like it gets harder later as you go along to be like, can that can the show live up to that idea? I don't know that it like does, but it's such an incredibly strong opening that has to be my favorite moment, is like the discovery of the bodies.
Interesting. Yeah. I do agree it's very strong, and I think that is what gets people on board with the show, is that sort of twist, that hook pulls people in. For me, I have two scenes that stand out. One I've already talked about, which was the scene between Iris and Hillinghead in their jail cells. I thought that was absolutely fascinating and a really like emotional scene, a really emotionally fraught scene where she's just like, she's limited on time. She's trying to convince him of like something that sounds absolutely preposterous.
Yeah.
And she's on a timeline, right? She needs to get him to believe her. But for me, the more emotional scene that stuck out for me is when Hillinghead goes to Ash and says, you know, you have to leave, you have to run. I've been forced to sign a paper saying it was you who murdered this guy. And Hillinghead goes to leave, and Ash hugs him from behind.
Yeah,
And
it's
it
very cute.
was the sweetest, and I died. Like, that was it. I loved that moment. It was something about the way the actors just kind of fell into that moment.
Mhm.
And it also reminded me of something from this is going to be really weird and sound extremely tangential, but like the show Friends, there is a moment where Chandler and Joey hug in this exact same
Mm.
way, where it's like a
Mhm.
behind hug, and it's just so warm and right. And I don't know, something about that moment really got to me. I really loved those characters and their little like romantic tryst. And
Mhm.
so I really, really enjoyed those two moments.
Yeah, it's cute.
What about your favorite character? This is a tough one because there's so many good characters on this show.
There are. I think ultimately I probably have to go with Hillinghead. I think he's I mean, it's hard for me not to pick like a queer character from the show, but I think I would pick Alfred Hillinghead. I give points maybe like Stephen Graham is really good, but I don't love him. I think Hillinghead is probably my favorite.
Yeah. Gosh, I mean, yeah. He's the best. Like, he's my favorite too.
Yeah.
It's hard to choose anyone else, but like, I mean, special shout out to Shahara too. I thought she was very compelling, and like,
Yeah.
I mean, not to be, I mean, we didn't really mention this. We've mentioned in passing, but like all four of our detectives aren't
Yeah.
your stereotypical white
Agreed.
middle-aged men detectives. You
Yeah.
know, like we have a closeted detective, we have a Jewish detective in a time where it was like really, really scary, to be honest, still very scary
Yep.
to be Jewish. We have, you know, and then we have a woman of color. Like, it's all, and it's just like, it's really incredible the diversity in this cast as well. But yeah, Hillinghead is my favorite. Something about him felt, I don't know, he had me so invested. I don't know if it was the
Yeah.
actor or what. I was very invested in his story.
Yeah. Agreed. Yeah, I mean, a little bonus point there for George Parker as Henry Ash, but yeah.
Yeah, they're so cute together. They're so
Yeah.
adorable.
Mhm.
Um okay, best death, cuz there, I mean, a lot of deaths in the show.
Well, I mean, it's got to be Defoe's, right? For
Yeah,
me?
it's
Yeah.
incredible. Of course. I mean, he
Yeah.
literally splits apart into four and goes into four different timelines.
When
And
they saw off the brand, also I will say that's multiple times this week I've watched a brain be sawed open on TV. So yeah, but pretty brutal when they're like cutting up his brain to find the bullet and they don't find it.
yeah, they're
Yeah.
like, "Oh, it's gone, but there's no exit wound."
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's got to be Defoe. Yeah.
Yeah.
Easy.
Yeah. No, incredible. All right. And then another question I had before we go on to our theme song ranking is, does the show work as a binge? It was dropped as a binge, all 8 episodes on Netflix at once. You said you watched over about 3 days. I watched over about 4 days. How did this work
Mhm.
for you as a binge, Grace?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question because I think to be very frank, part of this show, full spoiler recaps, is the acknowledgement that they companies like Netflix drop their shows in a binge, and we're trying to sort of like figure out how to meet how people are watching the show. I know we got some feedback about like why'd you call Hall of House of Usher like you did in like 8 hours in one podcast, and it's like I hear you that like that show might be worth it, and there will be shows that like even though they're on full spoiler recaps will get like additional breakout coverage like if it's warranted. But like this is how people watch it. Like this is how I think a lot of people are going to spend their time watching bodies. And so like I'm not trying to be like I just missed the notion of the question, Jess. But to a degree, it's like, yeah, this is how, if you're going to get your show on Netflix, this is probably how they're going to do it until they decide not to do it. Annoyingly, they're raising their prices again. Friggin' pay your actors. Come on. Ridiculous. But do you know what? I think that there's one reason why I think a show like this works better on a binge, which is Dark was a masterpiece and was a show that was so heavily plotted out. But if you are not that show, if you are not Baron Boadar and Yante Frise, who created and wrote and directed Dark, time travel shows are really hard. And almost I think the advantage to this being a binge is that, like, I bet if we went through this with a fine-tooth comb, we would find things that were like, what about this? How they don't explain this?
Yeah.
And that's not like a critique of the show. This is how hard time travel stuff is to do. And so I actually think there's a way in which, like, it all kind of blending together and you just like living in it, it can be a very fun way to enjoy an information heavy show. And that's not every show, but I do think sometimes it, like, a show could actually like bump up in my estimation if I watched it all together rather than if I went week by week with it. So that is my like defense of Bodies being a Netflix binge show.
Yeah, I think I disagree just because this is so much like Dark, and with such a dense show, it's nice to have time to sit and ruminate on what you've watched and like theorize.
But here is the thing. You and I do a show where we do have to binge it. But
yeah,
no show ever has to be a binge show.
No show ever has to, but that's how they release it, right? So that I assume that's how they intend their audience to consume it. And
Maybe.
So in my mind, I actually do think this show, if I were to go back and be able to watch the show at my leisure, and be able to just watch it as I wanted, I feel like 2 episodes a week is where I would pan out. I feel like this would be a fun show to have a conversation about over a month. And yes, people would figure out your twists, right? That's another con to watching it not in a binge and not watching it in a bubble and having the water cooler talk and all of that is people will probably figure out your twists, right? Like every show, this happens a lot where things get figured out and people get disappointed. But it is such a dense show that I had to rewind the show multiple times at certain points because I was like, wait a minute, what just happened? And I had to go back and rewatch stuff. And so for me, for my brain and how it consumes things, I feel like 2 episodes a week would have been my preference for how to watch a show like this. But that being said, I mean, I got through it. And I understood it. 8 episodes. Now, Dark's a show like Dark, which we're making a lot of comparisons to. I could not watch 8 hours of Dark and still be like a living, breathing human being with words to say because also it's in German and that has subtitles and blah, blah, blah. But like, it's just so dense, right? And for me, most dense shows like that, I need time in between to process. So I do think this is probably a show that I wouldn't necessarily recommend people like binge one after the other. Like you'd need a little bit more sitting time with this.
See, but I still actually think it was the right move for Dark to be. There's the difference I think between not having cultural conversation about your show. So if a show is good, I feel like binge shows do it a disservice to be able to be in the zeitgeist for longer. Like a show like The Bear, I think would have, the idea of it like dropping as a binge, I feel like does a total disservice to that show because people only talk about it for, I don't know, 2 to 3 weeks. But I do think there was something really fun about being able to binge Dark and then later go back. Like that's a show that like is rewarding on a rewatch. And I actually kind of think the same thing about Bodies. And I think like the first pass through, I do think it's kind of fun to just like completely binge it. And like, yeah, you won't pick up on everything, but there's a way in which like that might be actually better for the quality of the show, like your perception of the quality of the show. And then later you go back and binge it. Like, I don't know. I guess I'm just like, I feel like I've been on this like shows shouldn't be dropped in binge. And I feel like I'm trying to like, pare down my like critique of that because I don't think it's going away, basically.
No, it's not going away, of course. I will just fight. You know what? I'm not done raging against the machine, Grace. I'm never done raging against the machine. Is what it is.
Fair.
But yeah, let's talk about the theme song. To refresh everyone, currently number 1 is The Continental from the world of John Wick, then The Fall of the House of Usher, and then Wolf Like Me. This show does have a theme song. And it does play every single time you watch a new episode. But but it's very like I don't know, mystery sounding to me. It's like it's
Uh-huh.
very, I don't know. I felt like it melded well with what the show is. It's about a minute long, which I don't think is a terrible length for
Mhm.
an intro to be. What do you think of it, Grace? Do you have an inkling of where you would put it already?
I think it's good, and I also what I liked about it was at the with the title card when bodies came up every episode, I'd be intrigued to go back and see if they mean anything. I don't know if they do, but like basically a part of the word, part of a letter would get revealed to be something different for each episode,
Mm-hmm.
which I thought was like interesting. I don't know if it means anything. I assume it is kind of like there's another show that did this where, or like sometimes like chapters will have like a symbol at the start, like Wheel of Time notoriously does this, where like
Yep.
the symbol at the start of the chapter means something. I really like that. I still actually don't think it's better than the Fall of House of Usher. I think the Fall of House of Usher, I know it's like not an intro, it's like a title card at the end of each episode. I still think that's like I like don't think it's as good as the Continental, but I do think it's better than the Bodies intro.
I disagree. I think for me, I would put it at number 2. I would put it at the above the Fall of the House of Usher, just because I think it like feels appropriate for what the show is. It's like catchy. It's not too long. Like a minute for me is like the
Did you ever
perfect
skip it?
intro length. I think I skipped it like once or twice, but that's because I was watching like 3 episodes in a row, and I was like, girl, been here, done that. I gotta zoom. Come on, I gotta keep zooming. I got a lot of
I
TV to watch.
I skipped it a lot. I'm totally fine to put it above the Fall of House of Usher, but I do think like the Fall of House of Usher one is way more memorable to me than Bodies will be in probably about a month.
Yeah, but for me, the Fall of House of Usher is more just, a lot of shows just do title cards. Like it doesn't feel different as much as
But it's
Bodies does.
not. No, I would disagree that people do the title card as the stinger to the death at the end of every episode.
Yeah, that's fair, because it is coming out. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Like a regular
Tough.
title card, I'm not gonna give it. I'm gonna be like, no, you should have paid somebody to do a whole
Yeah.
intro. But the way that they utilize their title card as like the exclamation
Yeah.
point on
Someone
the death
dies.
every episode,
Boom.
boom, it's so good.
Yeah. All right.
That's
All
just my
right. Yeah.
defense of
You've
it.
convinced
But
me. Let's
well,
put Bodies at number 3. Let's put Bodies number
okay,
3,
all
because
right,
I think it's close enough for me that I'm comfortable with it.
yeah. I
But
was
I just
comfortable too the other way around. Yeah,
shout out to the just the score. I thought it was a really good score because it
yeah, it
does
is.
sound mystery
It's the
y
violin. It's like
to
a
me.
violin, like do 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 do. It's pretty good. It's
Yeah,
pretty
it's like
strong.
intense but not too intense.
Yeah.
Awesome. So that is where the theme song currently ranks. Next week, so 1 week from now, Grace, I'm
Yes.
actually gonna be on vacation. You're gonna be
Yeah.
bringing in some pinch hitters here.
It's very funny because this is probably the most dark like show we'll ever watch, and so for next week, I'm going to bring the dark crew to come
It's
and talk
incredible.
about. Yeah, we're talking about All the Light We Cannot See, which is a Netflix miniseries, 4 episodes. I think they're run about an hour long. The reason why I'm bringing the dark crew is because our good friend from Dark, Jonas Conwald, aka his real name
My
is
name is Jonas.
can't remember, it's fine. Lewis Hoffman is portraying somebody in this show. This is based on a book that won the Pulitzer Prize, I think in 2014. It's a war novel, and basically the idea is there's this blind German girl and then a German soldier who are both in France, and their lives are intertwined, and that's all I'll say. I've seen the first 2 episodes, got to see it at TIFF. It's pretty good. Not written, directed by and produced by a Canadian named Sean Levy. So I'm excited. No relation to Dan or
I was
Eugene, but
just gonna say.
no, no. He is the primary producer of Stranger Things. So he's,
Oh,
yeah.
incredible.
So I'm excited to chat about it. It's got a great cast: Mark Ruffalo, Hugh Laurie,
I love Mark
Lewis
Ruffalo.
Hoffman. He plays a very adorable, sweet dad, Jess. So I know that you're not going to be here
Oh,
for the podcast,
I'm
but
gonna have to watch it.
yeah, you should watch it.
There's
It's worth it.
something
4 episodes. Yeah.
there's just something so sweet about Mark Ruffalo, and I don't
Yeah.
know what it is, but like he's the reason that the Hulk is my favorite of the
hmm
Avengers. And I
hmm
feel like that's probably a hot take. I don't know if
Yeah.
most people find the Hulk to be their favorite.
Yeah.
I just love him. He's so sweet. Even
Yeah.
when he is Hulk, I'm just like, but you're so cute.
Yeah.
Look
So
at
All the
you.
Light We Cannot See, dropping on Netflix on November 2nd. That's a Thursday. Will the podcast episode the following Monday. So look out for that.
Yes. I think that's everything. You can find me at the Jess Sterling. I am finishing up my coverage of Billions with Josh Wigler. Beyond that, I'm still doing Freaks and Geeks, Dawson's Creek, all that fun stuff over on Shoot 90 Shows Taught Me. And that's where you can find me. What about you, Grace?
Yeah, covering the fall of Rome with Rich, Yellowstone, The Morning Show, Tales from the Loop, movies, Our Flag Means Death, a whole lot. So I'm on social at Hi from Grace.
Incredible. All right. Until next time, you've been fully spoiled.
And you've been fully recapped.